probably don't want a conservatory.
If you ask anyone who's lived with one, they'll probably tell you that they're too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. That would be a problem in itself if you could at least isolate your conservatory from the rest of the house. Unlike our house, where there's a 2.5 metre wide permanent opening from the conservatory right through to our kitchen, which I will note that the surveyor told us would not meet building regulations if it was built today. The temperature problems were definitely our experience in our first few years of being here. So to try and manage that, we did a couple of things. In the summer we would hoist a shade up outside of the conservatory in the form of this old jib. And in the winter I began lining the inside of the conservatory with bubble wrap, which did make a surprising couple of degrees of difference. This made it slightly more livable, but we still were just hemorrhaging energy in the winter, paying as much as £400 a month to heat our house, which was just insanity. There's a lot we also didn't like about this conservatory. I was never too hot on the walls on the inside, which never really looked quite right to me for a reason I couldn't place. And aside from thinking that the UPVC that it was constructed from looked a bit cheap, my next biggest gripe with the conservatory was the fact that there were crevices up by the eaves boards that spiders like to live in and were almost impossible to clean out. Now I wouldn't mind the spiders if they didn't just throw the carcasses of the flies that they catch in their webs back out at you throughout the day when you're sitting in the conservatory.
This is literally overnight.
It was really gross. There were a few other minor details that I really didn't like about the conservatory either. There are plenty of companies out there that offer to rebuild your conservatory roof and replace it with something much more efficient. But I was pretty shocked to find out how expensive it was to do them, so I decided I'd rather do the job properly than this sort of surprisingly expensive halfway house solution. I figured the best way to start with that would be to find an architect, so I went on the REBA website and I used their Find an Architect pages to do exactly that. We ended up finding a pair of architects whose work we really liked and happened to be really incredibly local to us, so I invited them over to talk about the project. We briefed them on what we wanted, which was to keep everything basically as it was, but to put a solid roof on it, and maybe swap the Edwardian peak of the roof to a gable end to maximise the light that could come in with the new design. We said we'd like this to be a self-build, and they thought that that should be possible, and they started drawing us up a scheme. I was really happy with the design when it came in. The architect said it kind of designed itself, which very much appealed to my own design sensibilities. It was very simple, it didn't seem too fussy, and so we were quite happy to get them to draw up more detailed plans. Working with the architects over the following couple of months was quite a strange experience for me. I found myself wildly ricocheting between wondering what I was paying all this money for and being totally surprised and delighted by insights that I'd never thought about myself. Once we were happy with the architect's plans, the project seemed to get stuck in development hell for a few months, going through a long process of structural engineer approval and building control approval. More than a year ended up passing before we could really start working on the project, and the place to start with that was to clear out the room and start boarding the opening up. I got some cheap sheets of OSB to board the door up, and I made a makeshift door in there as well to give us some access while the weather was still good. It was a taste of how much darkness was to come to our kitchen though, which was quite a shock. It was still nice and summery though, so dismantling the old conservatory was an attractive proposition. I started by taking the eaves boards off, which are ones that I replaced not long after I moved in, because I just couldn't bear the plastic ones that were up there before. I started poking around at it to work out how it went together and therefore how I could take it apart. And the roof started coming apart really easily. I asked Lily to help me slip one of the glass panels out to see how it went. And before we knew it, we'd taken them all out.
Woohoo!
It was laughably flimsy at this point. It was shocking that it was holding all of this incredibly heavy glass up. I'd got some cheap glazer's suction cups off of the internet before I started dismantling it. And it did take a minute to start trusting them, but after I did, they were a godsend. They were so helpful in pulling it apart, particularly when taking the vertical windows out. With most of the glass out, I then had to figure out how to dismantle the frame of the roof. The diagonal bars were relatively easy, but the more of them I removed, the less was supporting the ridge beam. So I did some sketchy work by roping it up to the upper window above the top. And between Lily and I, we managed to get it down, which was a massive sense of victory.
Alright, we're gonna get this down now.
The conservatory looked pretty funny at this point. It almost looked like a plastic acropolis in our back garden, but I was really happy to be taking it down. This conservatory had a series of fan-like windows, but the ones closest to the house were dummies. And I was pretty bemused when I dismantled it to discover that the dummy one was just a regular fan-like window anyway, hinges and all, just without a handle attached to it. It was fascinating seeing how this thing was put together. A couple of days later I had the entire structure down, and I had been careful to make sure that I labelled every part as it came down, and grouped them all together in a logical way, ready to sell it on eBay. I wasn't really sure how selling it on eBay was going to go, because most of the ones for sale on eBay come with the provision that you have to dismantle it to take it away, and this one was already apart. For that reason I had a couple of time wasters who were particularly aggressive in their messaging, which just really baffled me, until a nice person messaged me and made a more serious offer. The buyers ended up driving all the way down from the north of England to take it away, but they did a great job of packing it into their van, and I felt a massive sense of victory when it went away, which made me feel like I was making massive progress on this project, and it had not even been a week. Thanks for watching. Keep it real.